Hi, and welcome to Europ's presentation on how to present effectively for this year's symposium. My name's Jerry McMillan. I'm a Europ advisor, and this is one of a series of videos we've created at Europ to talk about all the different types of presentations for this year's symposium. Just one thing to think about, all of these videos are referenced within the student presentation guide. And the guide is your detailed source for all information about the symposium. These videos provide a lot of information, but a lot of overviews. For details about the application process, about how to present, about all the different things going on at the symposium, read the guide. Read it early, read it often, refer to it always. But now let's talk about presenting. And the point of this presentation is whether you are doing a poster, whether you're doing an in-person presentation, whether you're doing one of our audition videos, these are things to think about whenever you are talking to people. So think about these things. First of all, absolutely make whatever you are saying clear. You want people to understand what you are saying. A lot of times at our symposium, your audience is going to be people who don't understand your topic, who won't have the background you have. How can you explain things in ways that they understand? Introduce words, introduce concepts in a way that they will understand it. Clarify what you're talking about. Get to the point. You know where you want to go there directly. Figure out what you want to say it. Avoid tangents, avoid lots of filler words. Say what you want to say, get there directly. As you're presenting, support your argument. You're going to make claims throughout your presentation. How do people know those claims are valid? Develop a logical flow that people can follow. If you find yourself saying, so obviously this, you've probably said something that isn't obvious to a lot of people. How can you support that statement? Make sure the claims that you are making are supported by other things you've said or other things you have shown as part of your presentation. This hopefully goes without saying, but make it interesting. We've all been to presentations where we're thinking more about when is this going to be over than we're thinking about what's being said. As you're going through your presentation, how can you design it so that people will want to keep listening to you? Make it interesting. And then there's something else to think about. As you're designing your presentation, as you're talking to your audience, humans react well to groups of three. And yes, I've just broken this rule on this slide, but if you can design things so that you are presenting things in threes. Why are 3 reasons you did this project? What are 3 things you learned from this project? How does this affect the world in 3 different ways? By having 3 different items that contrast, people will more easily remember what you're saying. So as you're organizing what you're thinking about, think about 3s. It's a natural way that people will react to what you're talking about. And speaking of organization, how do you want to organize your presentation? There is an utterly classic way that you've probably heard many times before. It's 3 steps. Tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, or briefly introduce what you're going to say. Then you have your body of your presentation, and then have a summary and something at the end that calls back to what you've already done. It's a classic format, and it's a classic for a reason. By telling them what to expect, they have a clue what's coming. They can more quickly react to what you're saying. And by summarizing at the end, they have a better chance of remembering what you've talked about. So this is a classic, absolutely proven method of organizing your presentation, and yet it's not the only one. If you can think of a way that you would rather organize your presentation, think about it. Think about what that would look like, but also always keep in mind, how can the organization enhance your message? I talked about how that classic method enhances it. If you're coming up with a different method, how will that work better? But going back to the first bullet on the previous slide, the important thing about your organization is make sure it's clear. You want people to know where you are. You want people to know what you're saying and how it connects to everything else. Your organization can tie things together so that the whole presentation, top to bottom, makes sense. After you figure out your organization, you want to prepare your presentation. First of all, simplicity. We talked about clarity. We talked about being interesting. The more complicated you get, the harder time people are going to have to follow you. Keep it simple. Let people figure out what you're doing. Organize your thoughts. We talked about the overall organization, but think about organizing each little element. How are you organizing individual slides if you're using slides? What's the organization sentence to sentence, thought to thought? So organization is multiple levels. Make sure it's clear on all of those levels. An important element is to open strong. How can you start your presentation so that people will immediately want to pay attention to you? I've seen way too many times where the moderator says, our next presenter is Jerry McMillan. He's going to talk about doing presentations. And the presenter starts with, hi, I'm Jerry McMillan, and I'm going to talk about doing presentations. You just repeated what's already there. What can you say that will get people to start listening to you? One strong suggestion, open with a question. Whether you intend the audience to answer it or not, by asking a question, people are going to start thinking about the answers in their minds, which means they're thinking about your presentation. I've seen a lot of great presentations start with just, have you ever? Whatever that is, people start thinking, oh, yeah, okay, I now have a connection to this presentation. Whether it's a question, whether it's something else, start with something that people will want to listen to, that gets them engaged. Then you can introduce yourself. But start with something that gets their attention. And then the corollary to that is finish strong. I've seen way too many presentations end with, and so that's what I'm talking about. Thank you for listening. Sure, say thank you for listening, and then finish with something else. One great way to finish, depending on your presentation, if it's appropriate, finish with a call to action. Whether it's based on what I've told you, go out and do this. Or whether it's what one point do you want them to take away? Based on what I've presented, remember this. Give them something to walk away with to remember your presentation. Don't just peter out because you've run out of things to say. And then speak to your listeners. Remember, not everybody in your audience understands your topic. There are going to be people there who know nothing about what you're talking about. How can you clarify what you're saying for them? And there are times you definitely want to include some specific details that may not be easily explainable. That's fine. But for me, what I want to leave my audience with, no matter who they are, no matter what their background, if they can walk away with the answers to 3 questions in their mind, I consider it a success, even if they don't understand everything. But if you can explain 3 questions so that they understand it, they will be satisfied. The first question, why did you do it? Why did you do your project? In a standard research paper, this is your background, your introduction. What was the body of human knowledge? What was the gap that you were trying to fill? How does your project build on what's already been done? What question or questions are you trying to answer? Why did you do your project? What did you hope to find out? That's the first question. Question 2, what did you find out? What did you discover by doing your project? That gap in the body of human knowledge, how did you fill that in? That's question 2. Question 3, and for me this is the most important one. Why does this matter? Or why should they care? Now that you have figured out what you have discovered, what are the implications of this? What are the impacts? What work do you need to do next to build on this? And if you can answer those 3 questions for everybody in your audience, if you then have some details they don't understand, they're still going to walk away from your presentation satisfied that they have learned from you. So speak to your listeners, whoever they might be. Maybe you want to use notes as you're doing your presentation. That's great, but make sure your notes are effective. You do not want to just write out a script that you're going to read from, because then you're paying attention to your words, not to your audience. One thing I'll often do for an in-person oral presentation is I will print just a very big outline of notes in something like 17-point type, just a few words to ground me on what I want to do. Then I can put it somewhere, I can walk anywhere in the room and still read my notes, referring to them very quickly. Nobody even knows I'm doing it. But create notes that you can use effectively. But provide yourself just enough information to stay grounded. Don't write out everything you want to say. Just put an outline. Make it easy to read and give yourself enough to remember where you are and where you're going next. And then regardless of everything else in your presentation, the more you practice, the better it's going to be. And I strongly recommend, as you are going through this process, I strongly recommend do not write a script and memorize it. The problem with memorizing a script is you may be going along your presentation just beautifully, but then something happens and you get distracted and you get off track. If you have a memorized script, when you get off, there will only be one word that's the next word in your script to get you back on track. But rather than memorizing a script, memorize your outline. Know what you're going to talk about next. And then when you're in each element of your outline, if you get off, you can say, what am I talking about? Oh yeah, this outline thing. I can talk about that. It's easier to get back on track. And then the more you practice, if you do it this way, you'll discover while each time won't be identical, you'll discover the more you practice, the closer it gets each time. And the more you practice, the more confident you're going to be that you're going to get through it in something resembling what you're intending. And then as you're practicing, time yourself. For any presentation, you're going to have a time limit, whether it's assigned by the event or whether it's just knowing how long a class is and you've only got this much. It is really disrespecting other presenters to talk over the amount of time you're given. And the only way you're going to know how much time your presentation is going to take is if you time yourself while you practice. Time yourself each time you practice. That way you'll get a clear idea of where you are in that time. No, it'll vary a little bit. When you're presenting, things will happen. You may get off for a moment, so maybe you want to add a little bit of time. You'll also discover a lot of times you get nervous and talk faster, so you'll use less time. But if you time yourself, you'll have a good idea of where you are and whether you need to adjust that. If, for example, you have a window allowed of 6.5 minutes to 7.5 minutes, aim for exactly 7 minutes. That way, if you get off a little bit, you've got 30 seconds on one side. If you are talking way too fast, you've got 30 seconds the other way. You've got wiggle room. Time yourself right into the middle of the allowed time, and regardless, when you are presenting, it'll be comfortable. So all of these are things to think about as you're preparing, as you're getting ready to present. So now we're at your presentation. The first thing to do while you're presenting is be excited. When you are presenting at our symposium, you are talking about a project on which you have spent a lot of time. Hopefully you're really enthusiastic about it. Share that enthusiasm with the audience. If you've ever been to a presentation by somebody who really doesn't care about what they're talking about, you will realize you didn't care either. The more excited you are, the more excited your audience is going to be. The flip side to being excited is relax. It's really easy to get so excited that you're bouncing around the stage and talking so fast that nobody can understand you. Settle into what you're talking about. Practicing helps a lot here. But if you can settle in and show that excitement, you'll be very nicely grounded and still convey that enthusiasm that's so important. Make eye contact with your audience. People want to feel like you're talking to them. If you're doing a presentation with a poster, you're only talking to 1 or 2 people. Talk directly to them wherever they are. If you're doing an in-person oral presentation, you've got an audience that may be through a huge room. You're not going to make eye contact with everybody, but find somebody in each part of the room. Look at them for a few seconds. Connect with them. Then move on to somebody else. And also make sure, if you're presenting in a wide room, make sure you don't have a bias of only talking to one side or the other. Make sure you're talking to everybody at some point. And we definitely recognize making eye contact with total strangers can be uncomfortable. And one thing you can do, if you're not really comfortable making eye contact, look about 2 feet over the heads of everybody in your audience. It'll still feel to them like you're talking to them. It'll still help you focus around the room to different places, but it'll reduce the vulnerability of dealing directly with people you don't know. So that's one slight cheat you can make if that's just too uncomfortable for them. Another, probably the single biggest tool you have as a presenter is your voice. We've all heard presenters who just talk in a monotone. We're bored, we don't care, and it doesn't help. Use your voice deliberately. You can vary your voice. You can speak louder. You can speak softer. You can speak higher. You can speak lower. You can vary the tempo. You can speak faster. You can speak slower. Use elements of your voice to emphasize important points. If you normally speak really fast and you're going along and you're getting to a very important point, stop for a moment and then deliver the point slowly. People will wake up and say, oh, this must be important. I should pay attention. Say something much louder or even much softer to inspire people to pay close attention to what you're doing. One thing to think about in terms of using your voice, a lot of people see as a flaw speaking too quickly. And to a degree, I disagree with that. If you are the sort of person who naturally speaks very quickly and that's the normal speed for you to talk, do that. I would much rather hear you speak quickly than force yourself to speak slowly because you think you have to and speaking unnaturally. And if you are a naturally fast talker, you need to remember the impact that can have on your audience. I like to use the illustration of a train. When you start talking, your train is now, you are the train leaving the station. Your audience is on one of those things you see in the old Western movies where you're pumping your way along. The train is getting farther and farther away from you. The faster you talk, the farther you get away from your audience. You need to stop occasionally and let them catch up. So if your natural speed is to talk quickly, do it. But make sure you can reconnect with your audience often so that you don't leave them trailing behind in your dust. Use your voice. It's the greatest tool you have as a speaker. And then, related to what I just said, the second greatest tool you have is the pause. One of the great things about pausing, it lets your audience catch up. It lets them reflect on what you've just said. But also think, if you are reading something, you have punctuation, you have commas, you have periods, you have question marks. You don't have that when you're speaking. Pauses provide punctuation in your speaking. When you finish a sentence, stop talking for just a moment. Then move on to the next sentence. It will help your audience say, oh, okay, it's time to switch focus just a little bit. When you finish a slide, when you finish a topic, stop longer. Then move on to the next one. Use pauses to ground your audience. Use them to connect them to what you are doing. It provides guideposts to what you're saying. You can also use a pause as you come to an important point. I'm about to say something really important. Here it is. By pausing before, you've got them expecting what's coming. By pausing afterwards, you give them a moment to reflect, to interpret what you just said. The other great thing about a pause is think about this. The single most uttered word at our symposium is going to be the word The definition of the word is, I don't know what to say next. Rather than saying, just stop talking. Look at your notes, look at your slide, just think, where am I? Then start talking again. Silence is far better than fumbling. People will forgive you for forgetting, for fumbling around, but it looks much more professional if you just stop for a moment and then go on. And the thing to recognize about pausing, for a lot of people, it's not natural. We don't pause a lot in our daily conversations. But if it's something you'd like to start using, start practicing it. Start working in an occasional 3-second pause. It'll feel like an absolute eternity. And yet, none of those 3-second pauses I just inserted felt unnatural or leaving you thinking, what's it going to say next? Work in a 3-second pause. Practice that. If you really want to go, practice a 5-second pause too. You got 2 different lengths. You can do different things with them. But a pause is a great tool to learn to use, and it makes your presentation look much more professional. And then the final thing when you're presenting that we all forget to do at times is just breathe. The voice is entirely built on breath. It's really easy to get nervous and go plowing along through a sentence and run out of breath and just feel like you're about to pass out at the end. If you're running out of breath, you're not breathing enough. Breathe often. Provide yourself the breath to power your voice, to keep your energy up. Your entire presentation is built on your breath. Use it. And then I want to leave you with one more element to think about. But in keeping with my suggestion earlier about end with a bang, let me do a couple things first. First of all, this presentation has been on how to present. It's one of a series of presentations, all built around the different presentations we'll have at the symposium. These videos are listed in our student presenter guide. And again, refer to the guide early, often, always. It's your source for constant, detailed information. And with that, I will say thank you and leave you with one more thought. The biggest thing we hope you can do while you're presenting is this. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you at the symposium.